is one of the most loveliest spots for us to watch this war before it ends. You know, it's going to take no time at all for our boys to whip those little rebels and put them back in their place. So if we don't watch it today, it's going to be over by tomorrow. I got a little picnic basket all set up. We're going to watch our Union boys. We have our pride. We say, yay, Union. Do you see that there's the little rebels? They're coming up now. All right, boys, let's show them what we're made of. Oh, my. That is quite loud, isn't it? They're getting awfully close. It's okay. Our boys are running this way. Let's get out of here.
And disadvantages that both sides faced during the war, which ultimately contributed to the final outcome. Northern advantages ultimately outweighed the Southerners, so much so that everyone in the North believed this war would last a week at the most. One battle, and the South would give up. It came as a shock when it wasn't over quickly, that this war would go on for years, and it will cost more American lives than every single other American war combined. The Northern advantages, which would be the Southerners' disadvantages. One was the factories in the North. They could mass produce weapons, whereas the South had very few facilities that could produce arms, never mind in mass quantities that would support an army. This was due to the North experiencing an industrial revolution, leaving them with a lot more factories that could produce supplies vital to supplying an army. The South was greatly dependent on agriculture and slavery, making it much harder for the South to industrialize. Since the North was not fighting on their own soil, this meant that they could protect their own industrial and transportation resources. This was an extreme disadvantage due to the South not being able to produce the items needed to fight for the war. The North also had nearly 3 times the population of the South. The North had 20 million people, whereas the South had 9 million. Out of the 9 million that the South had, 4 million of those were black slaves. The population thus allowed the North to field a larger army, which made replacing combat casualties easier. General Grant used to refuse prisoner exchanges offers from the South for the reason that the South needed soldiers much more than the North did. The North had already had a well-trained, organized standing army and navy, while the South had to build theirs at the start of the war. In addition, the North had better roadways and highways, and also seized much of the country's railroad and canal systems, which were used as resources to supply the forces. The more railroads and transportation options meant that better communication was now possible, and supplying soldiers were quicker as well. The South, on the other hand, had the advantage of being on the defensive side, which meant that the North had to invade and carry the fight into it. The fact that the Confederacy was defending itself meant that the Union had to conquer all of the Southern territories to claim a victory. The South had many soldiers who were dedicated to preserving their homeland. The majority of the top leaders were Southern-born. When the South left the Union, the soldiers went with their home states. Throughout the war, Lincoln was trying to find generals that were competent, but many say that Grant was the only good general the North had, as opposed to the South, who had plenty of great leaders. The South had all the great leaders, like Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Longstreet, Stuart. They were lucky to have these officers who knew how to fight and make the best of the bad situation with the resources the South had. Lincoln's Secretary of War, Winfield Scott, came up with a simple strategy to defeat the South. He called it the Anaconda Plan. Blockade all the southern ports and cut off supplies and trade for the Confederacy, and keep them from trading with England. Take control of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in 2, and then take their capital of Richmond, Virginia. Simple, right? It seemed to all the Union at the time that the odds were ever in their favor. The first battle began near a Virginia town called Manassas. The Union sent volunteer soldiers there. Families from the surrounding areas, even as far as Washington, D.C., came to watch the battle. To everyone's surprise, the Confederates won. Those families who thought they were going to have a nice picnic ran with the Union Army all the way back to Washington, D.C. Needless to say, the battle shattered the Norse hopes of winning the war quickly. Fun fact, most battles of the American Civil War are known by two names. One the Union Army gave them, and one the Southern Army gave the battle. The Union Army would name battle after the nearest town, while Southerners named battles after physical features, like a nearby river. Most of the soldiers who fought were under the age of 21. Some were as young as 12. The Union soldiers were called Yankees, Yanks, or Billy Yank by their Confederate enemies. Confederate soldiers were called Rebels, Rebs, or Johnny Reb by Union soldiers. Remember how the South had all the great generals? One of them was Stonewall Jackson. His real name is Thomas Jackson, but during the Battle of Bull Run, when Confederates wanted to retreat, the men saw their General Jackson standing like a stone wall on top of his horse. He didn't even move from his spot when a bullet went right through his hand. He earned the nickname Stonewall Jackson after that. While the South had some famous generals, the Union not so much. Take General George B. McClellan. He was the first commanding general of the Union forces. He was hesitant to attack the Confederates or do anything. He had many disagreements with President Lincoln. One time, Lincoln went to McClellan's home to discuss the war. McClellan wasn't there yet, so Lincoln decided that he would stay and wait for him. After a few hours, McClellan came home, took one look at the president sitting in his front parlor, and just went upstairs without saying a word. How rude. By September 1862, the U.S. will see the bloodiest battle in U.S. history up till this point. Spoiler alert, this record will be broken less than a year later. Now, how the battle even happened is quite the story.
This sentry duty has to be the worst job in the entire Union Army. Nothing ever happened. What's that? Someone left a box in the middle of the field.
Oh, it's a box of cigars. It's our lucky day. We can just light one up now and...
Hold on. What's wrapped around it? It's Robert E. Lee's battle plans?
What? The soldiers did give the information to McClellan, but he was true to his character and waited a long time before he did anything about it. This did not go down well with Lincoln, and McClellan was removed from his post. Antietam was still a major Union victory, even when it cost so many lives on both sides. Still, it was the first major Union victory, and Lincoln was waiting for this moment. This was the victory Lincoln needed to convince Congress to get behind his Emancipation Proclamation. We will get into the Emancipation Proclamation at a later time next week.
Are a band of brothers that laid into the soil, fighting for our liberty, famine, war, and toil. When our rights were threatened, the cry rose near and far. Hurrah for the money blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah, for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the money blue flag that bears a single star.